Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We are on episode 8 of number 6. And the last episode, despite all the technical difficulties, was really good. There was a lot of things set up. So I decided after episode 7, I would go back and read one more volume of the manga. And so I've read volume 3 of number 6, and I think after reading volume 3, I'm gonna stop for a while and maybe wait till episode 10 is over before I read any more, because it's pretty much caught up, which I have conflicting thoughts about. So last episode we set up, there was the kiss, there was Safu, whatever the heck's happening with her. There was Shion's mom, whatever is happening with her and Yaoman. There is finally been communication between Shion and Nezumi. Finally, like, so many good things happened last episode, and it's setting up kind of because we really have 4 episodes left. We have this episode and then 9, 10, and 11. So it's setting up the final arc of this anime. And I have conflicting thoughts because I've got my book of notes that I've been taking, as you can see, for the manga as I've been reading it. And with Volume 3 pretty much covers episodes 5, 6, and 7. That's what Volume 3 covers. So I don't want to read Volume 4 until I'm at episode 10 or after episode 10, because I don't want to be spoiled. And there's basically the only difference at this point. There's one big chunk that's been left out of the manga, and I'm going to talk about that. But basically, it covers the events of episodes 5 through 7. It just reorganizes them. And I like the way that the manga organizes the events of episodes 5 through 7 better than the anime. I do like that. It's a bit more fluid, it's a bit more succinct. But you can tell watching the anime, after I've read these first 3 volumes, you can tell that the anime is reworking scenes, and there's some parts that have not been addressed in the manga that are in the anime that I'm wondering if they had to move around and put in there now, because otherwise it wouldn't have made sense later. There are 2 big things that have not been addressed in the manga that have been addressed in the anime that I want to talk about real quick before we start this episode. A little minor note is that the whole theater scene with Nezumi as Ophelia, someone in the YouTube comments noted with episode 5's reaction that event is actually like an extra from the novel. It's not actually in the manga, which kind of on one hand makes me a little bit sad that we don't get to see it in the manga, but on the other hand it makes me really happy that the anime included it, and they were like, no, this scene's incredible, we need to have this in the anime. I'm so glad they did that. Like we see in the manga, volume 3 starts out with a color spread of Nezumi as Eve, and it's beautiful. And so I thought going into volume 3, I'm like, oh, we're gonna get that scene, and we don't. And so I was like, dang it. But I'm glad that the anime includes it. But there are 2 parts that haven't really been addressed in the manga. The whole mind meld thing between Nezumi and Safu has not been addressed. That happened in episode 5. And I'm wondering, since episode 8 is, I'm assuming where volume 4 would start, if that's going to be something that comes up later and they just introduce us to the audience now. Don't spoil me, but that's my headcanon right now. That's my theory, is that either it's an anime only aspect that they've done, and I'll talk about that in a minute, or it's something that hasn't come up in the manga. So there's that. But the big thing that the manga hasn't addressed that I really appreciate that the anime has is the whole full context of Safu and her grandmother. Because in the manga, Safu's grandmother dies, but we don't see Safu go to the funeral home. We don't have the sewing needle metaphor, the connection between her and her grandmother through the sewing needle, and we don't have that conversation at Twilight House. It just instantly goes from Safu comes back to number 6 when her grandmother dies, and then she tries to get a hold of Shion because she feels bad, realizes something's up, and goes to Shion's mom, and that's where we get the scene that happened back in episode 6. So, on the one hand, I get it. They cut out that wasn't in the manga and they added that in. But I'm so glad the anime added that, because not only do I have a personal connection to those scenes with Safu and her grandmother, but her grandmother was kind of Safu's lifeline to humanity. And it's what snaps her out and makes her realize something's wrong with number 6. And without that connection to her grandmother, it kind of feels in the manga like Safu just suddenly realizes, she's like, oh, what's up with Shion? Why is this so bad? And she goes to the mom, but there's not that kind of her rethinking things like there is in the anime. And I really appreciate that. So I don't know if maybe we'll flash back to that later on in the manga and we just haven't got to it yet, or if it's something that's anime only. And if it's anime only, I'm glad they included it, because that's one aspect I really like, and it made me appreciate Safu's character a lot more, having that moment with her grandmother and the moment in the funeral home in the series. Like, I really appreciated that. So, yeah, there are a couple other changes, and I don't want to get into them yet, because where Volume 3 ends is kind of where I think Episode 8 is going to start, so I'm going to hold off on thinking those. But here's where I'm conflicted, y'all. We're at 3 volumes into the manga, and 3 volumes have covered the events of Episode 1 through 7 of an 11-episode series. So a lot of you have told me, you're like, some of you have said, one, that you weren't crazy about the way the anime ended after reading the manga, and some of you have commented that the manga and anime have different endings. And I'm conflicted with that, because either there's 3 scenarios that are going to happen here. Either I'm going to watch the anime ending and love it, and then go read the manga ending and be like, oh, okay. Or vice versa, I'm going to watch the anime ending and be like, huh, and then go back and read the manga and be like, oh, cool. Or I'm going to be happy with both. So it's a weird scenario. I've never watched an anime where it's completed and the manga's completed and they have totally different endings. I've never experienced that. So don't spoil me, but it's going to be a very odd experience. I'm going to do a soapbox whenever this is over, where I cover whatever. I'll probably only read up to Volume 4 by the time I end this series. So then Volumes 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 5 extra volumes, I'm going to have worth to talk about in the soapbox. So I have a feeling that I'm going to have a lot of extra discussion in that soapbox episode of the manga and what all is left out and missed. So I'm excited by that, but I'm also kind of apprehensive. So I'm trying to go into this as a blank slate and just viewing the anime as its own thing, and then the manga is kind of supplementary at this point. But it's a very interesting situation. It's very curious. So I don't know, but we're going into Episode 8, y'all. And so far, everything with the manga has caught up. I'm very curious what's going to happen. Nezumi and Shion have finally talked. They finally discussed things out. They have a plan. They're going to break into number 6. That'll go well. and in the meantime, we don't know what's happening with Safu. Some weird experiments, which in the manga, we did get a callback. We had a scene where there was the scientist man and another scientist. And I think the other scientist is the man from the picture of Organization X that Nezumi said that was the man that named me. And I'm like, oh. And they're talking about like live samples, and they're talking about experiments. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, Safu, at the end of last episode, I kind of theorized that Safu's the one they have that is the sample, the golden egg, for whatever reason. And I'm wondering if her and Nezumi is the other live bait sample, because in the manga, they are like, we want Nezumi, and we want Shion caught and brought back to us alive. And I'm like, so I feel like it was a kind of a little bit of a spoiler. I'm like, okay, so when they go into number 6, the organization's going to want to get them. But the anime may totally change that. So I don't know. I'm going to try to push that to the back right now. But as of the manga, they have Safu. And so I'm wondering if that's where the whole mind meld thing comes in, because Safu and Nezumi are experiments and they're samples. And so I'm very curious about all that. So many unanswered questions. And I'm assuming the manga is going to give me answers, and the anime may not. But we shall see. So in any case, I've rambled enough. We're going to start Episode 8 of number 6. And I hope you all enjoy the reaction. But let's dive into this. We are going to start this here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and hopefully we'll start at the beginning of the episode. Let's go. Oh, wow. Okay. So, this episode. So much exposition. I'm so curious now to see how the manga deals with this and how it breaks it down, or how it expands on it, what it ends up doing. I'm so curious now, y'all. I told y'all I was not going to read any more of the manga until after episode 10, so I'm going to wait for volume 4. I'm going to wait. So intriguing. So I was talking in the ED of the reaction that in the manga, volume 3 ends with Yaoman, the reporter, talking with Shion's mom and saying he's part of the organization, that's like underground, trying to find out more with number 6 and take it down. And it kind of seems like it has the same agenda as what Nezumi wants in just taking down number 6. So I'm curious if this underground organization within number 6 are like people connected to the people of the forest, how that all works. But that's where it ends in the manga. We don't get him going back to her place. We find out in the manga that she didn't know who he was until they got in the car together, until he rescued her. And then he tells her, he's like, well, my niece has been seeing you to get muffins. And so it's like, oh, okay, cool. But then in this episode, it's all going good. And then he's a little bit unhinged. You can tell he's a little bit affected by what's happened, because when he tries to do that hug on her, it's so creepy, and she's like, no. And I like that she tells him why. She's like, no, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not going to replace your wife. I'm not going to replace your wife and son that's missing. Like, you can't replace Shion for me. Like we can't replace what we've lost. Like, that's not going to work. And he seems okay with it, but he's like, well, just think about it. And in the preview, he looks a little bit more unhinged, and I'm like, I've always got creepy vibes from Meowman, from the reporter, and I think it's more to do with the anime, because in the manga, he doesn't have creepy vibes yet. So, but then again, we have a lot of ground to cover in the manga, so all this stuff that's happening in the anime may come back into play later on. Oh my gosh. What exposition. So, I was wrong. The scientist that named Nezumi, it was one of the scientists from the organization, but it's not the ones that we've seen in the manga. It's not the ones that are clearly still within number 6. It's this one man. And I'm curious to know if the manga is going to go about this the same way. I'm very, very curious. But as soon as I saw him with the white hair, I'm like, man, you've aged a lot in 20 years. And I'm like, it's the wasp. And of course, he has the same thing that Shion does. So someone else has survived the wasp experiment. It was retrieved before it was too late. So that's very curious. We finally get an explanation to the song. It's Aurelius, which seems like a goddess. It seems like a god, like some kind of force, some kind of entity beyond humanity that has been like a power source, like something. It sounds like a godlike creature, Aurelius, and they label it as a her, the queen, the ruler. That they've discovered, and they want to tap into her power. And this song that she sings, it seems like this song is connected to her, and the people of the forest know the song. Which is curious, because it makes sense that Nezumi would know the song, even if it's subconscious, because he grew up with the people of the forest. So that song was probably embedded. We got way back in episode 4 or 5, back in episode 5, that song being sung to him. And I thought at the time that it was being sung to him in the correctional facility, but it's not. It was when he was in the forest. And obviously that's probably the voice of his mother teaching him the song and being like, this is your connection to Aurelius. And he just didn't realize it at the time because he was too young. And it sounds like number 6 took him as an experiment. And so he's a live sample. So that brings up some questions, though. Safu hears the same song. They say Nezumi is the only survivor of the forest, but how would they know that? Unless they encountered Nezumi and determined that. So maybe Safu, because it's established that Safu doesn't have any family except for her grandmother. It could very well be that the grandmother took her in, and they're not directly blood related. It could be that Safu is one of the survivors of the forest as well, and just managed to make it into number 6 somehow. I don't know. That's very curious, but it's curious that she knows the same song. And when she has that weird flashback, I don't know if it's a little confusing in the anime whether it's a flashback to her and Shion having this conversation, because I could see whether she's hallucinating in that moment and kind of mixing visions with memories, because it would make sense she has a flashback where she asks Shion about the sweater that her grandmother knitted. And it said in the manga that the grandmother knitted that sweater for Shion, but we don't actually see him getting it like we do in the anime. But when she asks him what happened to the sweater, and he says, oh, I gave it to someone, obviously she's like, what? You gave this prized possession to someone? And it sounded almost like she was having this flashback to a memory, because she's much more affected by it in the scene. And I wonder if that's like a mixture of hallucinating with the present with this memory, because obviously she's lost her grandmother at this point. She would have more of a reaction than maybe she would in the past, because past Safu I think would be like, oh, why? And in here she's like, no, why? So there's a clear emotional difference. and then he doesn't say, he can't say whom, and she makes the assumption of Nezumi, which makes me think it's like a blend. It's kind of like I'm watching Modao Zushi at the same time, or I've been watching Modao Zushi at the same time. So it's kind of like that mixture of hallucination with memory, one of those tropish things. So I'm wondering if that's the case, because then she flashes back to being in the tank, and everything turns like rainbow, like it did with Nezumi when he sang the song. And they said they wanted to awaken her. So I'm wondering, is Safu like a reincarnation of Aurelius? Is she like the vessel holding this goddess inside of her, which would be bizarre, but okay. Don't spoil me. I'm thinking out loud. That would be interesting if she's like this reincarnation. It gives me big princess. The whole flashback of the forest burning and the little light bubbles coming off of Aurelius when the song is sung. It gave me very Princess Mononoke vibes from, Hayao Miyazaki's film. It gave me very Princess Mononoke vibes of everything just kind of rising up and being like this spiritual entity. And so I'm wondering where the parasitic wasps come into play, if that was like a byproduct of Aurelius. In any case, we know that there's been multiple survivors. We know that there's a way to survive. He was the first person they inject, which makes me wonder, is that old man Shion's actual father? If we never find out who Shion's father is, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. Part of me is like, it's not Regika. Regika's kind of like his adopted father at this point, or he thinks he's Shion's adopted father because he likes Karen. But part of me is like, is this old scientist man Shion's dad? I don't know. Because would it make sense if genetically Shion survived the wasp because of his connection to this man? And why would this scientist give Shion everything and just trust him automatically? I don't know. I mean, it makes sense. Shion's a genius, and it makes sense kind of why he'd give him all the information. But at the same time, I'm like, what drew you to Shion other than the fact that he survived the wasp incident just like you did? I don't know. I love that Nezumi, when they first meet, he calls him ferocious. He's like, be careful, he'll bite. And it's like, I like it a lot. But yeah, so many questions. So many questions. I'm very, very curious. I'm very curious what we do with this going into episode 9, because we've got the layout. Inukashi's in. Inukashi and Regika are in on the plan to break in. We've got this small force to gather information. We've got Nezumi and Shion. The preview looked like the holy day. They were just going to cleanse everything outside the wall, which I wonder if it's a holy day like what they did with the forest, the people of the forest, where they just burned everything down, if they're going to do that with the West End. It looked like there were explosions, like they were just going to tear everything down, kind of like just a cleanse outside of the peaceful walls of number 6. Like, we can't harm anything inside number 6, so we'll just tear everything down outside of it. I don't know. In the manga, the scientists established that they want to capture Shion and Nezumi again, and they've assumed that they're in West End. So I wonder if in the manga, this whole tearing down of the city and everything is to find Shion and Nezumi. And it may have a better connection in the manga than it does in the anime. But so much exposition this episode. And I feel so bad for Shion's mom, because that note he sent her at the end is basically saying, like, hey, I got your note about rescuing Safu. We're going to go do it. And now that she knows everything about number 6 and knows the history behind it and how they are, like, cleansing everything, she's like, crap, I've sent my son directly into the fire, and I shouldn't have done that. And it's like, what she doesn't realize is they were going to do it anyway, regardless of her message. It's just Safu being there has expedited the process. So I'm super curious about Safu now, if she is a vessel for this Aurelius. Because they said they're trying to tap into this power of this entity, this life force, and if it's within Safu, then I'm wondering if they've been experimenting on people of the forest and experimenting on other samples to try to see if any of them are vessels of her, and that's why they had Nezumi to begin with, and then Nezumi managed to escape. And what's interesting is the song that they sing, like, the other people were scared of it. Like, it's a beautiful song, but the other people were terrified of it. So I'm like, what all is going on? Very, very curious. So yeah, I'm not going to read volume 4. I'm either going to wait till after episode 10, or I'm going to wait till the series is over to read the rest of the manga. but I'm very curious now. We've got kind of a setup to our climax. Rescuing Safu is the plan. Breaking the correctional facility. It's all going down. Holy Day is coming. There's been this span of time frame happen, and now it's like it's all set up. Now Shion has the little flash drive chip that he can use to kind of uncover what's been going on. Exciting stuff. So we shall see. But in any case, I'm excited. I hope y'all are too. Thank you for watching this reaction. I hope you all enjoyed it. But yes, next time we'll do episode 9 and see what is going to happen next. But I'm pretty excited. I'm so intrigued to know what's going to happen with these last 3 episodes and how that's going to differ from the manga. It's color me intrigued indeed. But in any case, have a good week. Stay safe. Take care. And I'll be back soon with more number 6. Bye.